Some little tiny village in the Parvati Valley, hella up there, way in the middle, up at the hot springs at the top of the pass, is not going to get the snowplow. Although there'll be 10 or 12 villages dotted across there all the way down to the valley back to the main road. And you have to wonder, how much supply do they have up there?
Adapt 2030 Mini Ice Age Conversations covers changes in our climate due to a new and intensifying grand solar minimum. In the media, overlooking, downplaying, or burying cold weather changes occurring on our planet. This is in order to keep the global warming agenda steaming full speed ahead. I do this podcast and radio program because we need to begin conversations on how to adapt our food growing strategies long before 2030 as agricultural zones shift, affecting global crop output, but very few mainstream media outlets are talking about the most important issue of our time, cold weather crop losses. Our sun is going through a 400-year cycle, which has effects on our weather patterns as our magnetosphere weakens and the jet streams go out of flow. It's not CO2, it's not you, it's the sun. Are you ready to thrive in the grand solar minimum? Then join me for Mini Ice Age Conversations. I'm your host, David DuByne.
Himachal Pradesh as well. Going up to Shimla, from Shimla, you're trying to get up into Leh and these other further areas north up to Chamba Valley. Oh, great spot, Chamba Valley. Highly recommended to go up there. It's just on the other side from Shimla. You can either walk over in a long, super long day hike, or you can take the bus around into the next valley. It is a magical spot. You got this town tucked way hell up at the very base where the river's coming down out of the mountain there, and then it's just hemp plants and pine trees all the way up the valley sides. Stunning place. Chamba Valley, secret spot. Anyway, all those valleys up there going up into Chamba and that whole way north up into Leh and Ladakh, that area from Shimla, villagers and other people living in the mountain communities, they don't expect the roads to be closed until mid-November, maybe a little longer. And this is the time when people transit all the cargo up there. You can expect enormous delays because all the trucks are moving through to bring winter supplies up in there. And these roads in the Himalaya are not wide and not large. Not wide enough for one vehicle, and sometimes two vehicles will come together, even Jeeps or whatever, and then one has to back up. And if you're going to go on local roads, super fun, amazing views. You can ride on the top of the bus in India. You get a ticket for half price, but the views are the best up there too. And not to mention, if the bus rolls off the cliff, you can jump off. So what's happening with all these villages blocked off? Now, the snowplows are running and have run to get the tourists that were trapped up there out. So the priority was getting the snowplows from Shimla into areas where tourists were trapped. That's an international thing. Some little tiny village in the Parvati Valley, hella up there, way in the middle, up at the hot springs at the top of the pass, is not going to get the snowplow. Although there'll be 10 or 12 villages dotted across there all the way down to the valley back to the main road. And you have to wonder, how much supply do they have up there? And what if they were last-minute shoppers and they were waiting to get everything in the next shipment? If it's happening like this, and it happened in Canada where the ports were closed too early because of early sea ice in the Canadian government's airlifting supplies up there, will the Indian government and the Nepalese government have to also airlift supplies to these remoter villages that are cut off? There are vast, vast, vast amounts of remote villages up in these areas. What about the places you have to walk up to? Not everywhere's along a road up there. You come into these hamlets, I'm going to call them hamlets, where there might be 20 or 30 families living, but you need to walk there for an hour from the next smaller town down. They're not walking anywhere in 3 or 4 feet of snow. I mean, the whole village, everybody living up there could come out and try to, shovel a single file path down or something to the next place. That would take quite a while, a lot of resources from the community to do such a thing. So we have these record early snows in the United States, in Canada, and these record early snows across the Himalaya. The thickness is astounding. I mean, you got to realize this is all predicted during the grand solar minimum, these cool areas on our planet. Alaska, during the last grand solar minimum, warmed up a full degree to 1.5 degrees Celsius warmer than it is today during the last grand solar minimum. So when people say, oh, Alaska's getting warmer, well, it did over the Maunder minimum duration as well of that cycle. Other spots to look for, Morocco. Talking about North Africa. So another hot spot that you'll be looking for across the planet here would be North Africa to become cooler and more snow. You know, they had all that record snow last year, super deep depths, record cold snow in Algeria and other places like this. Now on to Mongolia too, I had a first-hand account. One of my listeners from my YouTube channel, Adapt 2030, had sent me. He and his wife are dairy farmers in Mongolia, about 3/4 of the way up Mongolia, just below the Russian border up there. And they sent me accounts also. Heavy early snows. Was that really thick, wet stuff, and it stuck on all the crops, and they lost tens of thousands of acres of wheat production. And what was not flattened by the snow was flattened by these excessive winds. The winter wheat as well. Difficulty planting for the winter wheat. With this being said, you have to realize all these early events have happened across the planet with these excessive rains and all these rain, atmospheric compression events. This is exactly what we expect moving forward. The events I'm telling you about is the prediction moving forward. The growing seasons are going to become shorter and already have. They're going to be facing super wet conditions. They're going to have to run things through dehydrators. You can't harvest wet crops and put it in a silo. You end up with a big silo full of mold, which would have been ergot poisoning for the witches. So to take you back to the 1600s, they didn't have dehydrators back then. If you harvested the wheat, you starved to death or you ate that harvested wheat that was wet. And when you put it in, I'm sure they tried the best they could to dry it out. But how easy or difficult would it be to dry 10 tons of wheat? Let's take the average American driveway, for example. How much wheat could you spread out on your driveway and get it dry? And what happens if an unexpected storm came in and re-wetted it again? Got to think about those things because they were eating wet crops, moldy crops. Their immune systems were depleted. And then they had the ergot, which had LSD effects. This is where a lot of the witch lore stemmed from. And again, they blamed people that were not to blame. And there always has to be a scapegoat during these events. What is the scapegoat going to be? Because eventually the dam is going to break here on the information about the IPCC pushing the CO2 narrative, one that's going to come seriously in the next couple of years. Everything you've known about CO2 driving climate is going to be proven false. And then at that point, where's the scapegoat going to go to? Because there always needs to be a lash out in these very difficult times. Who are they going to target? Because they targeted women as witches. They had priests. Oh, this is in Switzerland too. I'll tell you this. There's famous lithographs of ice descending across in Switzerland down and destroying villages to the point where they had priests up on the glaciers throwing holy water on it to try to stop it. So of course I thought it was natural. It was from God. It was something. So anybody who knew natural medicines, anybody who had divination powers, round them up. So just think about all the people that were removed out of society at that time. Those were the real seers of our day. So imagine the DNA that was lost. If they were to have children that would have had those same powers passed on to them, psychic abilities, intuitive abilities. That was a complete wipeout of that gene pool of those types of special abilities across our planet during that time. Planned? Some would say yes. This is what I'm talking about with the uptick. And if you take a look at Valentina Zarkova's work and their double dynamo in the sun and the canceling magnetic waves, you'll see that there is a giant uptick happening between 2019, 20, and 21. So to put it in perspective, all the climate change you have ever read about, heard about, seen, reported on, watched a video about from 2014 until today, I'll consider that a unit of change. That's one. We'll consider all that change as like one. That is a unit of one. You have to realize it's going to amplify 4x of all the changes we've seen. And I really believe we're starting to step into the new extremes for 2019. This is going to amplify through 2019 to the uber that it is going at right now. But then you got to realize in 2020, it's going to amplify from this up again another 2x from what we're starting to see. So one of my viewers wrote me and said, what are we going to see, a year worth of rain in 3 hours? And I wrote back and I said, well, you might start to see like 6 months of worth of rain in 3 minutes, not 3 hours. These are the types of amplifications that I'm talking about. Now, can you imagine such events? Because this is what they talked about in the 1600s. Hailstones that weighed 5, 6, 8 pounds each, that after the storms rolled over, it pounded villages and towns that were made of wood into the mud so deeply that when people looked, you didn't even know there was a city or a town there previously. Those hailstones pounded that even the shards down into the mud. You didn't even know there was anything there prior. This is the amplification we're going up to, and I'm still wondering why they keep talking about CO2. And we're not talking about solutions for all of this. This is downright scary looking at their forecast here, and it's models, and the models are pretty good on what we've seen over the last few years. And when they're talking about a prolonged vortex that hangs over Europe, I don't know what kind of winter you're going to have or even what can be grown, because they're talking about already Spain being completely wiped out to almost zero agricultural production. Now that, just from the greenhouses not being able to be heated or the extra cost rolling in to heat the greenhouses, which they don't, I don't know how this is going to play out this year. So the amplification for the 2019 amplification, think about if this comes true, what I'm telling you, and this happens in 2019, when we come into 2020 and 21, welcome to the new mini ice age, because that's exactly what it will be. Springs will be so delayed, the droughts are going to amplify, the rain events are going to amplify, and they're not going to be able to plant crops. So think about the amplification in these next couple of years beyond this. So 2019 is a very good indicator of where we're going in 2020 and 2021. And when I say that, you really need to protect yourselves. You need to learn how to grow your own food. You need to get some long-term food storage together. You need to think about being more self-sufficient, talking with your communities. What happens if you're locked in your home? What happens if these storms come in and they block people in their home for 2 months, 2 weeks? Let's even say 2 weeks, fine. How able are you to cook food? Do you have some food set aside in your house for 2 weeks being locked in there? If you have seeds, you can sprout those. You can have fresh veggies in your house, even though it's freezing outside. It's just the little things. And how long will it take for it'll be completely overwhelmed snow removal infrastructure to get through all these events? How are the pipes going to handle this? How are the electrical generation stations going to pull on this all-time record demand? You got to remember last year in the European super freeze, they were rediverting power, and they were just a sliver away from going grid down over there due to the power pole. They were trying to reroute power all the way through different countries. And that was just a single event that lasted, 4 or 5 days? Now, how are they going to cope with the power generation? This is a society reset button that's happening. I'm firmly in belief that the global powers, the governments of nations, will not warn the citizens. They will not want to create a global panic, because we know how people behave when they're told danger's on the way. We've seen when hurricanes come and people don't even prepare until the very last second, and they go in and empty all the store shelves, and people are fighting over a ridiculous can of beans or something. That's for an event that they know will pass and help will come, and you know how the cycle goes. The hurricane comes, there's damage, help comes. What happens when it's a prolonged 20-year event? That's a game changer. People will be waking up, understanding that they're going to need more finances to get ready for this, and they might very well start pulling money out of the bank, exiting their stock positions, and this would have a huge repercussion in our fractional reserve banking system. And I do believe that that's one of the reasons why governments of our planet are not warning the citizens and continuing with this CO2 myth. Everybody's been brainwashed into this thing and indoctrinated for 40 years, CO2, CO2. I think it was a purposeful thing myself. It's my own opinion. You can agree or disagree. I want to start you off here. New article coming out. This is off of SOT.net. The dark story behind man-made global warming. Those who created it and why. Piqued my interest because I believe the same exact things are going on behind the scenes to try to control humanity, to try to keep the power structure intact, to get you to convert over to renewables. And then at the end of it, if you exit this planet, they're going to try to transition away and you will have built everything for them. Thanks very much. Thanks for playing. See you next round. The energy investment alone just to convert over to where 1.5 billion people could exist and work and live on renewables would be $2.4 trillion per year. That's the type of investment money they would need to continue from this point forward. And you just need to wonder where all this disappeared money has gone over all these years. So all this neuro-linguistic programming of climate change deniers, as soon as you hear that, what do you think? Climate change denier, they've ingrained this into such a negative term that even if you, like myself, I believe the climate's changing so much that it hasn't changed this much in 400 years. It is changing much faster than any of the IPCC CO2 models are talking about. I believe the climate changed so much it's going to reset our society, and we need solutions right now, and we need to start talking about it right now because climate change is going to devastate our societies. But I don't believe it's CO2. I believe it's from the sun. Even though I totally agree with 90% of the climate change of all these things that are happening, because I don't believe it's CO2, I'm labeled as a climate change denier. Although I'm the complete opposite. I'm the biggest climate change proponent on the planet. These events happening and intensifying are going to affect everyone on the planet and morph all of our lives into a new type of living situation, if you will, economically. But I believe it's from the sun, and I still get called a climate change denier. I get on a list now of a big climate change denier. So it's the same thing, like a Holocaust denier. They're putting that in the neuro-linguistic programming into the exact same category, you know? You're a Holocaust denier. You're a climate change denier. So where does this put us? You know, you start to get into these word games. Global warming. See, they went away from global warming because it didn't warm. Now it's snowing and record cold, so they call it climate change, and they've morphed over from everything's going to get hot into, well, we told you record cold was coming because of CO2. And that was a bait and switch extraordinaire because they trickled it in over time. Because if you're older than 40 years old, if you're 50, 40, 50, 60, you remember when we were in the 90s and they were talking about it's going to get hot, we're going to boil like frogs in a pot, it's going to get hot, 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 everything was hot, hot. And now they're saying record cold is because of CO2, and we told you that was going to happen. Well, no, you didn't. Originally, it was all hot, hot, and then you morphed it over decades to bring in the new generation. So if you talk to a kid who's like, say, 8 or 10 years old, they're going to have a completely different understanding of climate change than we were brought up with, because the message is morphed into CO2 is causing more snow, CO2 is causing heavier rain, CO2 is causing colder temperatures. Completely 180 degrees of what we were taught and told. You know, they're just covering themselves. They're trying to say CO2 is responsible for anything and everything, even birds going in the wrong place. It's because of CO2. And continuing on the article here, the tipping point of irreversibility. Well, we've kept hearing that. How many times have we heard, we only have 5 more years to save the planet, 5 more years to save the planet? Let me see. I've heard that since 1991. Every couple of years, we keep getting the repeating message. It's almost like a parrot with a broken record. 5 more years to save the planet. Well, how many times can we eclipse and keep going past these marks that they set for us of doom and gloom before we start to collectively wake up and say, wait a second. You told us there'd be no sea ice by 2007. Arctic ice-free. 2007, that didn't happen. So they moved it to 2009. That didn't happen. They moved it back to 2015. That didn't happen. They moved it to 2018, but you see we gained ice this year. So now they moved it back to 2040. Same with the sea level rises. Oh, the sea level is going to rise. We're going to have to leave the coasts. All right, so it's been, 45 years? And how many people are leaving the coasts? None. If they are, it might be somewhere in Bangladesh with natural erosion. If there's no action before 2012, it's too late. And we keep hearing it again and again and again. Now, they're going to continue to push this as an explanation for the changes you're seeing to prevent a global panic. See, the flawed data they're using, and they're caught left, right, and center with no temperature manipulation to try to cool the past to make it look warmer, like it's a linear trend of warm, warm, warm. 1930s Dust Bowl era was equally as warm, but they try to erase that out of the records, and they've been caught so many times fudging data and making record temperatures where there's no stations, these kind of things in Africa. They're going to push this as you freeze. This is the excuse that they fed you to explain all of the global weather changes you're seeing and we're amplifying into to prevent panic. I am firmly of the belief now this is the entire point. In the 1970s, they talked about the new mini ice age, and then we had that big spurt of solar activity, the highest solar activity in 3,600 years in the 1990s, and then it's just dropped off now, and we're continuing to drop off. The drop-off is just as ferocious on the multi-millennial marks as the solar activity at the high point. But the Malthusians are out there saying we need to reduce global population anyway, we need to reduce living standards. Well, we're seeing that already. If you're looking at the communist Marxist left in the United States with their political agenda, all they want is a loaf of bread for everybody, and anybody who has a fruitful existence and making money in businesses, you're the bad guy, you're the boogeyman. Oh, wait, I said man. Oh, that's so socially incorrect. Boogie people. They want a redistribution of wealth. And if you can't see it, and if you can't see the violence on the streets, and if you can't see the ideology, and if you can't see how it's very similar to what happened to Mao Zedong in the Communist Revolution in China, I highly encourage you to see a play-by-play unfurling in the United States of what's happening politically. Just go back to the 1960s and read about the Cultural Revolution. The parallels are astounding to the point where it's scary because it's the playbook of your future. The SWIFT system. We're all familiar with SWIFT. This is how banks transmit money, or you transmit money from your bank with a wire transfer to another bank, either in your own country or internationally. They're the ones leading the charge with DLT for bank transactions. So you can see the ecosystem is already starting to spin into its own thing, specifically for international banking. It's trying to create its own blockchain system. If I'm a business owner, I want as many mechanisms for you to purchase my product and make it easy as I can for you to use my services or product as I can on the planet. So why would I not offer you that other option of cryptocurrency for payment? Just makes no sense why they wouldn't. It's faster. There's less transaction fees. Remember, the crypto valuations of single full Bitcoin will be worth $1 million US. That number is going to change because the value of the dollar is going to flip at that time. So the valuation of whatever perceived value left is going to morph as we move forward. So the dollar accounting, that's just pure inflation. If we're going to talk about dollar amounts, for valuation of Bitcoin, that is pure inflation and pure money printing. But when we come down to the real world, what will that buy you at that time? Specifically related to food. The foreign regulators are all over this too, and that's another thing. Now, the U.S. is teaming with foreign regulators to tackle this cryptocurrency. So not only is the U.S. coming on board to lead the charge into the regulation, but now they're pulling every other country in the EU and over in the ASEAN trading bloc and African trading. They're pulling them all under one single network here, so everybody's abiding by the same laws of international fintech or economic transaction in any traditional market. So they're trying to do the same exact thing of the traditional markets, just move it over into crypto, and everybody's on the same law, the law books, and everybody abides by the same regulatory statutes. So continue on here. Bitmain, they want to what's called a startup powered central bank. They want to create these new private central banks. So you can, and I'm going to say it again, follow the money. Where's the money going to as this transition from the old economy into the new economy evolves? Fujitsu. This is where we go here. Like Fujitsu is leading the charge into these new smart contracts. So Fujitsu is rolling out everything that you're going to need to be easily able to program and use smart contracts. Japanese are taking the lead on this. They're also taking the lead on harnessing Ripple for consumer payments apps in Japan. They're also taking the lead on regulating crypto exchanges, including the security inside, getting them to abide by money remittance laws. Japan is taking a huge lead in every single way, shape, and form. And then from the People's Bank of China, the Chinese digital currency will be unveiled at some point in 2019, which will allow Chinese citizens to then use apps on their phones to use this new digital yuan in place of the paper money that's used across the country. That's really interesting. Because the new thing also is going to be mining. This is going to, as the world expands and the crypto universe expands, mining power is going to need to expand. And the way they're doing it now, the electricity costs are driving down. There's new technologies coming out that, by the way, all use silver wiring to drive down electrical usage during a mining operation. So there's advances in technology to drive down electrical usage, which is the biggest. There's more electricity used to mine Bitcoin than some countries. This is going to change. Also, the amount of mining hardware that we need is going to exponentially increase. And they're also going to need to be a lot more mining facilities, and individuals will start to mine. This is going to be the new gold rush, really, the mining. Countries, governments, states coming, you know this thing's for real, and you know it's staying around. And look for the increase in this as we move forward, because this is how we're going to buy, sell, trade.